Welcome, everyone. I hear that our music has subsided, which is my cue to get us started. Hopefully, folks had a chance to not just listen to the music, but take a look at some of the logistical slides that went around. But welcome to the Christina and Brandywine River Remediation, Restoration, and Resilience Stakeholder Workshop. So just to make sure we're all in the right place. If that's what you're here for, then you're in luck, because that's what we have today. So my name is Jennifer Adkins. I'm the Director for Clean Water Supply at American Rivers. And I'm going to just quickly kick us off, and then I'll be coming back at various times. But to start off, I did want to just point out that we did have some housekeeping slides going through as we were getting started with some tips for technical issues, but just a couple of the key ones are outlined here about, please do use the chat box, whether you're having technical issues or questions or comments or whatever, those are all welcome. There are some tips for if your audio isn't working, as well as for closed captioning and things like that. But if everyone could also please remember to keep yourself muted during the presentation, just to avoid background noise. We will have plenty of time for discussion and speaking in this workshop. The whole second half of the workshop and more is going to be really hoping to hear from all of you. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things. And before we dive in, I did want to just give a very quick overview of the agenda. As I alluded to, there are kind of two parts today. And the first part, the first hour, is really us sharing some work that we've been doing, the project team on this project over the last 6 to 9 months. And then the second half is much more discussion oriented. We'll have a break in between in case there are folks that need a break or need to log off. But the second half is really going to be about discussion. There'll be lots of breakout groups. We've got some great facilitators. So if you're feeling during the first half that you're not getting a lot of chance to talk, that's okay. There will be lots of opportunities in the second half. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Marion Young, who is part of our project team. And Marion is with Brightfields, and she's going to get us kicked off with an introduction to CBR4.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Stakeholders Planning Workshop. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, and for anybody who'd like a refresher on our acronym, CBR4 stands for Christina and Brandywine Rivers Remediation, Restoration, and Resilience Program. So there's two primary goals for this workshop. The first one is to review and discuss and refine the CBR4 draft goals and strategies. And the second one is to develop relationships and a strong team to accomplish the challenging goals of restoring our rivers to health. Give me a second. It's been 2.5 years since our September 2019 technical workshop. And that's where we laid out the vision and started planning how to remediate the sediments in the tidal portions of the lower Christina and Brandywine Rivers. Since then, we've raised about $1.3 million, and we have two concurrent efforts underway. The first is restoration planning, spearheaded by Christina Conservancy and American Rivers, and funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And the second is a sediment remediation feasibility study, spearheaded by Brightfields and Anchor QEA, and funded by Delaware's Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. Today, you'll hear a brief summary of the early tasks supporting the feasibility study, and then we'll spend the rest of our time hearing about and discussing the restoration planning. Though our CBR4 efforts are focused today on these two tasks, we're mindful and grateful to the many people who have worked to reclaim and restore our rivers and who continue to make them beautiful, useful, and accessible today. Some of the major milestones are shown on this slide. Back in 1978, Sally O'Byrne and Priscilla Thompson produced Project ROW, Reclaim Our Waterfront, which was a lot-by-lot inventory of the old buildings and their heritage. One result of this was an innovative zoning change that allowed for mixed use on the riverfront and eventually led to redevelopment of the brownfields along the river. Over the past 26 years, the Christina Riverfront redevelopment has facilitated the cleanup of 100 acres of brownfields while reclaiming former industrial properties for productive commercial, residential, and recreational uses. With the planned redevelopment of Riverfront East, our CBR4 team will be working with the Riverfront Development Corporation and their designers to identify restoration opportunities and develop projects for future funding. So now we have a quick update on the first steps. Next slide, Meg. Thank you. In the focus feasibility study. Our team compiled existing data to perform a comprehensive assessment of contamination. Our data sets include upland soils, groundwater, sediment, surface water, and fish tissue. We're also using information from several bathymetric surveys and from riverbank evaluations. We're performing preliminary risk screenings of 20 land-based riverfront properties, plus in-water risk screenings for the rivers themselves. Next slide. We're using EQUIS and GIS databases to store, manage, and statistically analyze test results and to map contamination patterns and data trends. We're working on a report that will summarize baseline conditions and identify data gaps, and we're preparing proposals to describe the studies that are needed to fill those data gaps. So that's the update on the focused feasibility study, and you'll hear more about this project at a future workshop. Today's workshop will focus on reviewing and discussing the draft CBR4 goals and strategies and capturing all your thoughts and ideas to strengthen the CBR4 program. But before we delve into the workshop, we're going to hear from an inspiring speaker, Lisa Bloodgood, who is doing similar river cleanup and restoration projects on Newtown Creek in Brooklyn, New York. Until very recently, Lisa was the Director of Education and Advocacy at the Newtown Creek Alliance, a community-based organization dedicated to restoring, revealing, and revitalizing Newtown Creek. There's a lot of similarities between their story and our story. Newtown Creek is in the Hudson River estuary, which, like the Delaware estuary, is part of the National Estuary Program. In 2017-2018, the Newtown Creek Alliance worked with their partners at Riverkeeper and the Estuary Program to create a vision plan. And this is what we're doing now. They identified priority issues. They proposed a list of projects to address remediation, restoration, recreation, and resilience. And Lisa recently took a new position at North Brooklyn Neighbors, where she continues to work on community-based solutions for public space and the environment. She's here today to talk with us about how important a vision plan was to Newtown Creek Alliance's success. Take it away, Lisa.
Lisa, you are on mute, if you can hear me.
There we go. I apologize for that. Hi, everyone. I was having some technical issues. Thank you, Marian, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for having me today. I am going to share my screen, and we can begin. So thank you again for having me today. I am so excited to be a speaker, kind of even a cheerleader, if you will, for your own project. The restoration of our rivers is critical and timely, and I'm thrilled that you all are on this pathway and I can be a part of your journey. So thank you again for kind of sharing my trajectory and my new position. North Brooklyn is on the southern border of Newtown Creek. It's the between Brooklyn and Queens border. And so, you know, my work today is still very engaged with the Newtown Creek, and we have a super fun meeting tomorrow evening. So I will be there. So this is just my opening slide. We partnered with Riverkeeper and Perkins Will, a design firm, with funding from the Doris Duke Foundation to develop the vision plan. And just so a little bit more context, you know where Newtown Creek is, part of the larger Hudson River estuary system, border between Brooklyn and Queens, and really centrally located within New York City. And as you can see, and we all know, New York City is highly developed, and Newtown Creek has been an industrial waterway for a very long time, but it wasn't always that way. And I think it's very important to always kind of ground our future visioning in our past and understanding what the geography and topography was, helps inform what we're dealing with in our present day and in our future. So you can see it was a very productive wetlands and was completely industrialized by the middle of the last century. And Newtown Creek was really the center of industry. And, you know, for those of you who don't know, this is where modern day oil refining began. And is a big part of the reason why it's a Superfund site today. These are historic images. We don't have the refineries there any longer. We don't have the chemical facilities that we once did, but that legacy is still there, which is why we in 2010 got our federal Superfund designation. And the vision plan was really, we wanted to create an inspiring vision that both boroughs and all the communities around the waterway could get behind. Because it's so industrially zoned, there's been no public access for, you know, more than 100 years. And so the community has been so removed from that waterway, it's been very hard for people to imagine what is possible. And we also are really, we're really interested in making sure the waterway remained industrial. That's pretty important, both to the communities that live and rely on those jobs, and for the city itself. We have to have industry in our cities to manage things like waste and wastewater treatment facilities and things like that. So our vision plan it's designed to show the current state, the whole host of project opportunities, and kind of give bigger picture system solutions. And so I'm going to explain kind of a bit of our process, and then what we've seen in the last 2-3 years since we released the plan. So our approach was really water focused, community driven, and we developed these 4 R's. And I love that you guys also have 4 R's. But resiliency, remediation, restoration, and recreation were all of the real parameters that we wanted to establish for each of these projects. And of course, partners are everything. We can't do any of this alone. And so we need both, you know, city and state, elected officials and agencies and community members, and some of our strategic water partners, Swim Coalition, Stormwater Infrastructure Matters, Riverkeeper, Billion Oyster Project, and the Waterfront Alliance, all kind of address different modalities of engaging the water. And our planning lens, right? How do we want to view each of these different opportunities? So parks and public space, I'm not going to read this list, but really having clearly defined planning lenses that allow people to engage within those contexts. So if somebody's really interested in water quality, they're coming to a visioning session, they can focus just on water quality and dive deep, so to speak, into one of those planning lenses. And we wanted to develop a plan for adaptation. So it's an industrial waterway, but development is increasing, especially along the East River and the mouth of the waterway. And so we want to make sure we're planning for those changes, and making sure industry remains strong and is not overwhelmed by some of the luxury and residential developments that other waterfronts are facing. And of course, climate risks, not just flooding, but issues like the urban heat island effect, pollution. Again, we're a federal Superfund site, so that is kind of paramount in how we're thinking about the waterway now and what we want out of that cleanup. Public access is so challenging in industrial spaces. And so we're really having to challenge city planning and zoning codes to allow for those spaces in these kind of non-traditional areas. And that has been, I think, one of the most interesting and in my perspective, exhilarating parts of this conversation is redefining how we can use these spaces in these non-traditional areas. And because we're because it's a Superfund site, we have this pre-existing community engagement group, the CAG, that already had kind of these 12 principles outlined that were most important for the Superfund cleanup. And so that was also early foundation for the work that was in front of us. One thing I want to point out here, climate change is at the bottom of this list. I am relieved it is on this list. I was not a part of the CAG when it was developed, but if I were to have the opportunity to do a vision plan 2.0 or to do this one again, climate change, I would think would rise significantly in this list and the principles there. And then on the right here is just kind of the now out of date timeline for the Superfund process. And then defining the R's and having clear definitions for what we mean by remediation, restoration, recreation, and resilience. And then how those different, the 4 R's kind of are reflected differently in each of the sections within the waterway. And we did break it down into 7 reaches, so it was easier to manage, but we did come up with a network of solutions and a holistic approach to the waterway, in addition to each section getting its own treatment. So the broad big picture and the finer grain and granule ideas. And this isn't meant to be an engineering document. This is meant to be an inspirational document, which I think is really important to also articulate. And so since we launched the vision, the response has been really, really very excited from just regular community members all the way up through our federal representatives and some of the trustees from the Superfund process, like NOAA, the State Department of Environmental Conservation, and Fish and Wildlife Federation. But okay, what I have here on the slide is how we've tried to approach integrating these ideas into the community, where we working with schools is critical, right? We want to make sure that the community is kind of coming up and growing and learning that the water is there for them, and what does ecology mean in an urban setting and things like that. So kind of coming at this idea from both the grassroots community and winning hearts and minds of our youngest members of our community, all the way up through, again, our elected representatives and city agencies and city planners is key. And then we've seen some really exciting activity around certain projects. And this one in particular has been just phenomenal to continue to work on, because it started as this idea of, transformed urban agriculture in an industrial space and regenerative industrial uses. And this is anchored by a community garden that's started on some decommissioned rail lines. And it's grown into its own project, and it's got its own life with its own steering committee. And so, how integrating a community project and vision that was already established into our vision plan gave it new life, which was a surprise and exciting. Okay, and then we've seen real traction on real shovel in the ground projects. So a number of these were included in the vision plan and some were born slightly after, right? This Gateway to Greenpoint plan is taking an empty and neglected lot right next to the wastewater treatment facility in Newtown Creek into an open space. And we have partial funding committed. And, you know, since the pandemic hit, our other projects fell apart, but we're really confident that now that the city's back on track, we'll get this fully funded in the coming year. And you can see this is on the right-hand side here. This is a slide for the North Henry Street and restoration, which is, you know, most of the streets that end in a dead end onto the creek are usually dumping sites and really neglected and are in very bad shape. And we have this beautiful plan and wetland restoration fully funded by the state and, you know, hopefully breaking ground in the next year as well. And other projects that are similar are moving forward. And a big part of that is because they were included in this vision plan that got the attention of these state agencies that were then willing to work with us in a way that they really hadn't been, or, you know, the possibility wasn't clear prior to the vision plan. And even things like community composting, we have empty or virtually empty sanitation owned property that we really wanted to see community composting take off. It's part of the mission of the agency and something we wanted as a community, and we included it in the vision plan and pushed very hard for it. And it's going to be happening, hallelujah, this coming year as well. So planting seeds goes a very long way. And something that I'm also extremely proud of, and what kind of I had already mentioned, is this idea of challenging zoning and really thinking about opportunities on the waterfront on these kind of underutilized industrial properties that could transform how we're viewing our waterfronts and our shorelines and in these non-traditional spaces. So every 10 years, New York City Planning Department, they are required to do a 10-year vision plan for the city's waterfronts. And they were really excited to incorporate some of our goals into that broader waterfront planning document, which again was something that I'm very proud of. And I'm very excited for the next 10 years of broader New York City waterfront development and how these ideas will begin to transform our shorelines and our access and our ecology. And then a slide I do not have, but is also really important within the context of the Superfund and the proposed cleanup that we're going to be getting on Newtown Creek. There's no real guarantee that restoration monies will be spent in the waterfront or on our waterway. It can be spent, you know, upstate New York. There can be an in-kind restoration that happens elsewhere. And this is for the natural areas damages assessment that happens through Superfund. But because we had our vision plan and because we were able to clearly state these are the places where restoration is possible, we know we're going to get a better cleanup and a more ecologically beneficial for our local communities and our local waterway, in large part because of our Superfund or our vision plan. And so that's all I have for you today. But I really hope that, you know, what we did in Newtown Creek is inspiring and useful. And, you know, as much as you can do small actions with small groups of community members in tandem with these bigger vision plans, that's just going to make your process and your end results that much better. And I encourage you to please reach out to myself now at North Brooklyn Neighbors or our executive director at Newtown Creek Alliance, Willis Elkins, if you'd like to engage the Alliance, but please do take a look at the vision plans online. I think they're beautiful. And thank you again so much for having me. This is great.
Well, and thank you, Lisa, so much. I think I've been a big admirer of your plan, just looking at it online since we started this effort. And I think, it is a larger area, a more urban area, in many ways, even more challenged than what we're looking at here. So I think to myself, well, if they could do it in Newtown Creek, then we can do it here for sure. But it's nice to look at someone else who's been in the shoes that we are now or close to it and think about, how that could be successful and really launch things, because we really are looking to this CBR4 plan and vision to launch things here, even though there's been a great amount of work going on, but really to have it as a unifier. And it's so exciting to think that we could be in the place that you are with your plan at this point too. So thank you so much for coming and being part of our program. And thank you, Marion, for kicking us off also and giving us a little bit of the history. And I do want to remind everyone that for our presentations, we don't have questions built in, but if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, we will make sure to get them answered. I can be in touch with Lisa and we can get other information from their process. So throughout the whole program, if you want to use the chat for questions, that's great. Some of them we might get to in the discussion later today, but even if we don't, we will be keeping track of them and making sure that we are addressing them as we go along. So the next part, and really my part where I'm going to dig in, is to tell you about the work that's been happening so far on the CBR4 plan. And Marion gave you the background about what the plan is, and hopefully from Lisa's presentation you get a sense of, I hope, where we're going and some of the things that we want to come out of this with. But I'm here to tell you where we are right now and what we've been doing. And so to start off, I did want to say just a couple of words about the CBR4 team, because you might hear me say the team or the CBR4 team. And that is basically the organizations that you see on the slide right now, or just seeing their logos. Obviously, not all the people. A lot of the people are going to be facilitating in our sessions later today, so you will get to work with them. Obviously, Marion has already been part of the program, and I'm with American Rivers, but all these partners have been meeting regularly for over a year now, and each of us is bringing a specific set of expertise and a role that we play on the project. So American Rivers and the Christina Conservancy are supporting and coordinating the overall effort and managing the grant for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for this work. And again, we're mainly focused on the restoration planning now. Anchor QEA is our data manager, and they're working with RK&K on that. And they're also our mapper. So you'll see some maps today. They also are partnering, as Marion mentioned, with DNREC and the remediation folks at DNREC, as well as Brightfields, on the feasibility assessment that she talked about. Partnership for the Delaware Estuary and Sarver Ecological are leading the assessment of ecological restoration opportunities. So looking at things like wetlands and shorelines and plants and fish and wildlife habitat, they are our experts on that. Delaware Nature Society is working closely with me and as well with DNREC coastal programs. And I do want to give a shout out to Maggie Pleta, who is behind the scenes working our Zoom. If you hear us refer to Maggie, that's our little cues of looking for some technical support. But really the DNREC coastal programs have a number of folks working with us, and particularly on the outreach, working with the Delaware Nature Society, both getting input from local communities, but also making sure that webinars like this are engaging and as well presented as they possibly could be. So all of the work that I'm about to share was developed collaboratively by this group of people that I just mentioned. And that's the group that I tend to refer to as the CBR4 team. I'm not going to go through this timeline in detail, but just wanted to point out that we are at a key point for the restoration planning. You can see from this that we have now completed sort of this top row, and we're the star at the end with this workshop. And that is that the team has been working over the last several months to compile a lot of information about where we are today and what the conditions out there on the lower Christine and the Brandywine and this corridor are today, and to start to assess the opportunities and the strategies associated with that. And what we really want to do today is we're going to share that, some of that with you, and then we're going to do some deep dives with lots of discussion groups coming up to get your input on the work that we've done. And the way that this will inform us moving forward is we're heading into a phase where our project partners will be very focused on developing projects. And so they'll be using the strategies as the guidance for the kinds of projects that we want to include in the plan, as well as fine tuning the strategies themselves. And we hope to be doing lots more community and stakeholder input as that process unwinds over the next several months as well. So we are looking to wrap this project later this year. And so our goal would be to potentially having another workshop like this close to the end of the year. And we'll see how that goes. So what I'm going to be doing next is you're going to see a series of slides that look like the one that you are looking at right now. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the work that we've been doing around a certain set of goals. And the one you're seeing here is really focusing in on wetlands. So there are certain features of the corridor that we are highlighting in our goals. Some of those came from the grant, the original grant, but they have been fine-tuned a little bit. And a lot of what we've been doing is, goals are about where we want to be in the future, but in order to figure out what it takes to get there, we have to really understand where we are right now. So the where we are right now is what we've been talking about as the baseline. So baseline is where we are now. Goal is where we want to be. And you'll hear me maybe sometimes talk about objectives. Objectives are the way that we can track how we're progressing in terms of meeting our goals. And so the project team has been working over the last several months to really dive deep into gathering as much information for this baseline to understand where we are right now. And then to use that to fine tune our goals, think about how we'll be able to track those goals moving forward. And then what are the strategies that we'll need to get there? And that's what we're going to come back to later today. So this first map that you're looking at is of wetlands. And we do have between 1,000 and 1,800 acres of wetlands in the project area, depending on how you measure them. As you can see, there are a number of different types of wetlands, but most of the ones we're looking at here are tidal in that the tides come in and out in them, and they are also freshwater. And this tidal freshwater type of wetland is really unique and particularly valuable from an ecological standpoint. So that's one of the reasons why we focus on wetlands. And of course, we want to see our goal is to protect and enhance and increase these. And one of the things we'll be looking at to tell how we're doing on that is that what we'd really like to see is no net loss of these important wetlands and improved function. So in other words, we know there might be some losses here and there for wetlands, but if there are losses, we want to see that there are also places where we gain wetlands. And that's the no net loss concept. And then we also want to see that there are projects happening that improve their functions. Just because you have a big wetland doesn't mean it's as healthy as it could be. It may not have as many fish and producing as many fish as you'd want it to be, or the water might not be cleaning the water as well as you'd want it to be. And so those are the improved kinds of functions that we want to see from wetlands. We also have goals around protection of shorelines. So shorelines are another really important habitat and water quality area where the water is meeting the land and you have that interchange between them. We do have over 100,000 linear feet of shoreline in the project area, and about 60% of that is in some sort of natural state. And by that, we mean that it's not partially or fully hardened. So when we talk about hardened shorelines, we're talking about seawalls or big rock structures that prevent there from being any exchange between the water and the land. And for the purposes of river health, we like to see that natural shoreline. And so that's one of the things that we'll be looking at in terms of tracking. And again, what we want to see in that is that we have very limited loss of the places where there is natural shoreline, and where there isn't natural shoreline, where we have those hardened shorelines. We want to see if we can improve the function of those areas by greening them up, is sort of a term that we've been using, greening up some of the hardened structures to make them more valuable ecologically for fish and wildlife, but also for water quality. We also have goals for riparian areas, and the riparian areas are the 100-foot buffers out from the shoreline, from where the water meets the land. 100 feet out from there is also critically important, and it's important for many different reasons, but a couple of them include those are the areas oftentimes that are parts of floodplain. So when water floods and water comes up, that's the space where those floodwaters can go. In addition, those are the areas that help filter water that's running off the land. So if we have water that's running off the land that's picking up pollutants from parking lots or whatever else is out there, if there's a nice healthy buffer, that buffer can help prevent some of that pollution from getting it into waterways. And along the riverfront, a lot of the areas along the riverfront are used for that stormwater management, which helps with water quality. So in our corridor, we have over 1,500 acres that are within that 100-foot buffer areas. And interestingly, even though it's a highly developed area, about 70% is undeveloped in terms of that there aren't actual structures and things right there, which is good because that's an area that's also, as I mentioned, vulnerable from a flooding perspective. And so what we want to see in our objectives around riparian areas is that we don't want to lose those buffer areas that have a lot of good vegetation, and particularly where they have trees and other vegetation that can help filter water. And we also want to improve the functions of ones that maybe don't have as much vegetation as they could, or don't have the kinds of features that will help them really provide a lot of high value function. The other thing that we are looking at and have goals around are in our corridor, we do have some adjacent habitat areas that can be more of uplands. And there are in the project area, there are over 1,500 acres there of those kinds of areas. And about 20% of those are forested, and 35% of them are protected, which means that they're either parks or in some kind of use that is protected, that they wouldn't be developed or destroyed or something like that. And so, and also over 17% of them are open to the public. So we know that these adjacent areas, especially the ones that are forested, are really important to the corridor overall and to the quality of water and the habitat in the corridor and in the river. And if they're open to the public and or could be open to the public, they're also really important for access so that people can enjoy some of these areas. And the riparian, I would say the same for riparian areas too, looking at how people can be close to the water and doing things close to the water is important too. And of course, we do have some goals around remediation. And we, Lisa referred to some of the challenges that they have regarding contaminants, which sounds super challenging. And we have some of those issues here too. We are not, our whole river is not a Superfund site, but we do have quite a few properties, and you can see those on this map that are showing over 530 acres of land in the corridor and over 630 acres under the water. So call it the subaqueous land under there is impacted, has been impacted by contamination in some way or another. So this is definitely something that is a big issue in the corridor that we want to keep moving that forward. So some of our objectives around this include, we definitely want to get that feasibility study completed, and we want to see a continued remediation of the priority sites that have been identified to reduce loading and to reduce contamination of fish over time. And it takes a long time to meet the goals of reducing contaminants in fish tissue, but we're already seeing some progress on that. So that is one of our goals there. And then also access. I've already alluded to this in some of our other goals, but in our project area, I've skipped forward to access. First, resilience. So Lisa mentioned that climate being on their list. Well, climate is definitely on our list, and it is one of the main things that we want to be looking at for all of the projects and strategies that we're developing. But in the project area, there are 700 acres of low-lying areas, nearshore areas which these are the places we really want to pay attention to, because if they're undeveloped and they have some good natural infrastructure, they can help to absorb floodwaters. We're also looking at, important in the baseline, is that there are 7 acres of existing tree cover. And we know that trees are one of the things that can absorb floodwaters, and they also help to keep neighborhoods cooler as we're expecting more, more extreme heat. And so our main interest around resilience is, and I should mention, we're mainly looking at resilience to the impacts of climate change. So flooding, sea level rise, increased heat, extreme heat. And what we really want to see is not a lot of loss of those natural areas that are low lying that could be good places for floodwaters to go, increasing tree cover, and a balance of green infrastructure and gray infrastructure to deal with stormwater and to make sure that flooding is not putting people or important habitats in harm's way. And here's the access. Last but not least, community access to rivers is one of our primary goals too. And in the project area, we have over 18,000 linear feet of buffer areas that are publicly accessible, 16 miles of trails, and at least 7 direct access points to the public. Although we know that while communities do value this direct access, there's lots of other kind of access that is just as important. Having areas with trees and seating near the water and a variety of views of the water is important too. And so we're looking at all of those types of access as we look at the corridor. And we've just started, you can see on this map, we've started to try and compile existing information, but we're also trying to scope out where some of the opportunities might be in that. So that's a lot of what we've been working on. Every one of those maps has many data sources behind it, lots of different information that our project team has tracked down, and we're using them, like I said, to understand where we are right now so that we can set the goals and then come up with the strategies and projects to actually reach those goals. And so we have also, as a team, started working on strategies. And I'm going to give you a really high level, very quick skim through these strategies because you're going to dive deeper into these in discussion. But just to give you everyone a sense of what kinds of strategies we're talking about, there's a whole realm of restoration strategies. So trying to restore different types of habitat and features where they don't exist anymore or don't exist as much as we want to anymore. And so everything from doing the actual work to making sure that the projects have good metrics and goals so that we can monitor them over time and see that they're actually having the function that we want them to. Also providing guidance to landowners and managers, recognizing that conservation organizations and agencies may not be the only folks doing some of these projects. We want certainly landowners and managers to be able to doing some of those projects too. Also in restoration, clearly identifying and implementing projects to restore wetlands, and for those habitats in the water and along the water are going to be some of the most important ones that we'll be working on. But also identifying and implementing projects that help connect different key habitats is important. And the graphic that you're seeing here on this slide, just a good, if you're wondering what a restoration project in the CBR4 area might look like, this is a good example. This is a graphic I pulled from the Brandywine Riverfront Northeast concept plan, which is an area in the Northeast that right now is a brownfield site. It doesn't look anything like this right now. It's basically a vacant property that's being cleaned up. But as you can see in this picture, the vision is to do a restoration project there that would restore the natural shoreline to create wetland habitat all along the edge of the Brandywine there, and also give people access to it. So we also are talking about protection strategies. So we're places where we have good things that we want to make sure that are staying there or even improving. And so one of the big areas we're looking at is managing wetlands so that they're even healthier and can function better. And this applies not just to like the large area of wetlands, but also we've talked a lot about trying to identify and protect and connect some of the smaller areas of wetlands and green space that could be managed together to provide greater ecological benefit. And so it could be places like in the photo here is a stormwater basin. There could be multiple ones that could get managed. Yes, they're being used for stormwater, but can they also be improved to be better habitat for insects and birds and wildlife and water quality and all of those things. Also in protection, under protection is more traditional protection. Up there may be some places where using conservation easements or using land ownership as a tool to protect places from future different kinds of uses. And then even thinking about things like how do we protect our local plant varieties by collecting local seeds. And also, you know, there are some pretty good regulations out there for wetlands, but making sure that those are used in the best way possible so that if there are some losses of wetlands, we get some new wetlands that are of equal or even hopefully better value. We also talked a lot about remediation strategies, and there is a lot of great work happening already on remediation that we want to continue, like the fish tissue monitoring and the cleanup of priority sites, and the completion of the feasibility study is at the top of that list. So continuing those, but also, next slide, thinking forward to the new approaches needed, and whether that's thinking about a new approach to remediation that incorporates more restoration and provides some of the tools and the BMPs that help to make the folks doing remediation make better decisions around doing that in a way that incorporates restoration, but also developing innovative new technologies for remediation. And a good example project around that might be the work that DENREC is doing at the A Street ditch, which this picture is from, where they're actually looking at applying a new technology to address some of the contaminants there, that if this is successful, we can use it in other places along the river. Other people could use it in other places, potentially along other rivers. Then we also have resilience strategies, trying to figure out are there projects that we could do that will help make this area more resilient to flooding and sea level rise and intense heat that we're expecting from climate change. And so we do recognize that there is some work around flood studies and modeling that is a little bit more involved, a lot more involved maybe than what we can do as part of our planning, but knowing that that needs to happen. There's also, we know, an effort by the city underway to develop a resilience plan for sustainability, and are very interested in taking a look at that and seeing what kinds of strategies we can help forward through this plan. And then also in resilience, you know, to look at specific projects that could help with flood control, whether that's using green infrastructure or a combination of green infrastructure and harder infrastructure. We also know that trees are going to be incredibly important, greening, to make sure that that they are helping to absorb water and that they're helping to cool some of our local communities. And then also making sure that we have lots of places where water can actually get into the ground instead of running off. So reducing impervious coverage. And a good example project of a resilience project might be the South Wilmington Wetland Park, which is the graphic that you see here, where it's helping to provide flood control, but it's using green infrastructure, providing a lot of habitat and hopefully water quality improvement. But it's using green infrastructure along with hard infrastructure. There's also work that's happening to separate a combined sewer system there to make sure that and those two things need to be part of the solution when we're talking about resilience. And then there are strategies that are more aimed at education and engagement. So we've identified a whole range of those, and this is really just skimming the top, kind of a high level overview of them, but everything from the idea of a community advisory council, a host of educational programs, and also monitoring programs. And importantly, programs like all of these would, that bring not just scientific knowledge to the table, but combine that with community knowledge so that we can come up with the best possible solutions, not just from an ecological perspective or just from a scientific perspective, but from the perspective of all of the folks who rely on these waterways for the best projects possible. Also in education and engagement, we talked about activities that will involve corporations and funders and needing a grant writing team. This is particularly relevant now. We've talked a lot about water infrastructure, and there could be a lot of opportunities that making sure that we're able to access those for the projects in the corridor. And ultimately, we'd like for CBR4 to be a model for other waterways. So it'd be nice to be able to share our success the way Lisa was able to share the Newtown Creek success here with us, so that we can, others can learn from what we're doing here. We also have strategies for community access. And so, and some of these are aimed at recognizing that we don't just want any old access, we want good access, we want safe access. We need to make sure that access is safe for people. And that we want all kinds of access, whether that's a water trail, which this little graphic here is from a concept plan that's been proposed out at the Peterson Refuge that might be a good example of an access project, but also including creating a variety of new access points. Some of them could be for views, some of them could be for seating and having people walk near the river. Not all of them need to be about getting people in the water. We want a variety. We also recognize that there are a lot of good projects that are part of local plans that we can pull from. Southbridge has a new neighborhood plan. In the Northeast, there is a blueprint implementation plan. So we want to be able to pull up and recognize and advance the work that has been done in previous plans and our strategies too. And last, but certainly not least, there are some strategies that fall more in the public policy realm. So whether that is at the local level, with things like looking at improving building codes and development requirements and improving zoning for healthier rivers and for people, or on the next slide, others might be more at the state level and looking at what kind of protocols can we have for building restoration into the really big projects like roads and bridges and transportation things, but also taking a look at all of the impacts of projects like that to make sure that to really look holistically how they're impacting at water and air and land and people, and then factoring that into decision making. And also for all of our projects to think about at the community level, when we're adding development or green space, finding ways to make sure that we're avoiding negative impacts to local communities with things like community benefits agreements. So I'm going to take a big breath because that was a lot of information I just dropped on you. And like I said, really, that was an attempt to summarize a big body of work that our project team has been working on for the last several months. And the aim of this, of course, is that what we want to do is to use these strategies to guide projects that we'll be working on next. And ultimately, we want to bring the goals and the strategies and the projects all together into this vision. And I'm just showing here, again, this is the vision from Newtown Creek, and ours will not look just like this, but it's a good example of how all of that can come together into one vision for the waterway. And so that's what we're looking to do. And before we start digging into identifying the projects, we want to share what we've done with you around the goals and the strategies. And we really want to get your input on the strategies. So we want to hear from you on, did we get it right? Did we get anything wrong? Are we missing anything altogether? And that's going to be the focus of the next part of the workshop with a lot of breakout groups. But and so we are going to take a quick break before we do that. But before we take the break, we would like to hear from you now in a poll to see how would you like to be engaged as we move forward. We are going to plan, this isn't the end of us getting input from you. So we want to know, our webinar is a good thing, our workshops like this. We could do something more like a newsletter. We certainly can do and have been already doing some individual presentations to a specific community. We can do social media, websites. We probably can't do all of these things as much as we would like. So I'd really like to hear from you about which ones work well for you and which ones you think are most important. And I see that people are already populating the poll. We're going to give that couple minutes. Looks like we have just over half. Oh, we're up to 60%. So we're staying around 70. So it looks like we have strong, oh, no, it's still switching. It looks like we have strong support for lots of these things. I should also mention that if you have other ideas or preferences around this or even topics, please, please, please put those in the chat. You can also, you'll have an opportunity to bring them up in the discussion, but we will be saving everything from the chat and we'll be using this information to guide us as we move forward. So I think we're good with 84% participating. We have a lot of website, virtual newsletter and webinars are the highest, with pretty close after that workshops, and then maybe a little bit of individual presentations and social media. So I think we're, so I think at this point, what we would like to do is, it's 2 o'clock now. And so part 1 of our agenda, we are through. We are going to take a 5-minute break. And we are going to ask everyone to please, please, please come back right at 5 minutes, because we're going to break out into some smaller groups to start discussing those strategies. And when you come back, we'll have some instructions for you about how we're going to do that in the breakout rooms. But for now, I want to thank everyone who joined us for this first part, in case there are folks who need to log off. But again, we'll take a 5-minute break. You're welcome to turn your camera off, turn your microphone off, get a drink of water, restroom break, whatever you need, and come back at 2:05 and we will get started on breakout session. So thank you so much. Thank you especially to our presenters for this part of the program, and really looking forward to getting into the discussion with you. Wow, so that 5 minutes went by pretty fast. Thank you for folks who are chatting in the chat. I was trying to take a look at what's coming in and offer, and I see that other folks are responding, which is great. We will be saving all of that for moving forward. So I think up next, Maggie is going to talk about, give instruction for the breakout sessions. But basically what we're doing is we'll have 3 different rounds of breakout sessions. So everyone will have a chance to be in 3 different groups. And you can choose the room that you want to be in. And the 7 rooms are organized according to the strategies that I just went over. So the breakout rooms are listed here: restoration, protection, resilience, remediation, policy, community access, and education and engagement. And so you'll get to pick, you'll get to be in 3 different ones. So there are some choices, although if one room ends early or you're done early, you can, I understand, go to another one. But Maggie, you're going to give the instructions for breaking out.
Yep. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. So in just a few moments, I'm going to launch the breakout rooms. For those who may not have used it before in Zoom, you're going to see kind of a opportunity at the bottom. This is breakout rooms. When it displays, you can open it and you're going to choose your room. Now, the thing to note is that you may have to scroll all the way down through other participants' names to find the breakout room names. So if you don't see it at first, just scroll a little bit and you can find it. You want to kind of hover over the room that you want to join, and then click join, and then confirm by clicking join. And then magically, you will be sent into that room with your facilitator and note taker. So each room will have a facilitator and a note taker, except for remediation. Sarah has all of the things. And you're going to go through a series of questions, walking through each of the strategies and that were shared previously by Jen. We'll have about 20 minutes in each session, and then we will come back to the main room and then break again for our second session. Then after we have our second session, we're going to take a little brain break, and we have a special presentation for you today from Mr. Frank Hansen, who is a student at Conrad High School, who's going to talk to us about his experience with the Brandywine and why it's so important to him. And then after that, we will come back to do our final third breakout session. And then after that, we'll do report out. So if you have any problems joining the breakout rooms, you can raise your hand, you can come off mute and let me know, and I can assign you to the room you would like. We do ask that we will that you don't go to the same room twice, so we can get as much feedback on as many topics as possible. So before I launch the breakout rooms, are there any questions? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and launch the rooms, and you all can choose where you want to go. You get to choose your own adventure.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had some good discussions in your breakout room. It's very weird not to be in any breakout rooms while everybody else is, and just like dying to know what you're all talking about. But welcome back. And we are going to take a break from our strategies for a minute to hear from a special guest speaker who's joining us. We have Frank Hansen is with us, and Frank is a student at Conrad High School. And he's going to talk a little bit about what makes the Brandywine River so special to him. So Frank, you can take it away, say hello and get started, or whatever you want to do.
Okay, yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, like you said, I'm Frank. I go to Conrad. I'm in 10th grade. And I was going to share my presentation here. Hold on. Is it beginning? Okay.
There we go.
Oh, can you see it?
Yep, you can see it.
Okay. So yeah, my presentation is my Brandywine experience, and yeah. So these are the reasons the river is important to me. So these are just a few of the reasons: the ecology and ecosystem of the river, the amount of experiences I have with my family, the fun times I have with my friends, and the research that I participated in last summer that I spoke initially about. The river is an important part of my life because at a young age, I was really interested in marine animals and fish and like things like that. And so my parents would take me down to the Brandywine, and I'd just spend like hours just going around the river, looking at like just the type of fish I see if I could find anything. And I was like, because until recently, you don't see a lot of animals in the Brandywine. And now I understand that it was like due to the pollution and just how unclean the Brandywine was. So that's why I was actually really happy to help with the removal of the initial dam, and so we can like start getting cleaner water. Because now as I go down there, I can see a lot more fish and like life in general. And we did the shad fest. There was a lot of fish. We did teach some kids how to fish and all that. And experiences of having my family. When I remember when I was younger, we used to have like group meetings there. Like our family would have like parties and birthdays at the Brandywine, and me and my cousin would just run around for hours and hours, having fun and just doing everything. Like we'd go to the river and like look under the rocks and all that. And it just made it like a really fun place in my mind for the Brandywine. And then me and my friends also like to go down there and just walk around like the edge of the river. You guys know like the bridge. We walk across the bridge, walk around the perimeter of it, and just like we just talk about stuff, or like we skateboard around it. And yeah, then the research I did like last summer and the summer before that, it really changed my perspective on like I understand pollution was bad because everyone's like, oh yeah, pollution's bad, but like it really you understand better when you're actually like a part of it. Like until recently, again, like I said, you didn't see a lot of animals in the Brandywine. You didn't see a lot of just like things in general. And the people who helped me in it, like Mr. Simeon, Mr. Ed, they helped me make some really meaningful connections, and like just meaningful connections that I won't forget. So yeah. So these are the reasons that I wanted to help. Like this is why another reason is important. Like I wanted to help conduct the study. So since I was 4, I've been wanting at least a marine biologist. And you can see here a picture of me when I was younger going to aquarium. Me and my dad visited this aquarium like hundreds of times. We've been there so often because I used to always love going back. I used to always it was just a fun place for me because I would just think I've always loved. And so I was really excited at this presentation. Like I was able to, well, even work with the shad, the NOAA thing, like work with them in general. Like it was just a fun experience I had. I going down to the river, catching all, like looking at these fish, like being taught how to like identify certain like species of fish. And that was just really fun for me. And these are another pictures of me going down to the river as a kid. This is me in my school uniform. The first picture, it was me. That means I was just fresh out of school. I asked my dad, "Oh, Dad, can we go to the river before we go home?" And he would take me down there. You can see me going across all these rocks. And I felt throughout participating in this, it made me feel like I've always like liked fish, but I feel like I came up with like a certain like level of knowledge to like, I guess, understand, like I understand a lot more about like, I guess, pollution and like how the different rivers are connected. So like us removing that dam had like like you think removing a dam just has an effect on only the thing, but it had a bigger effect on like the entire just area. Like I said, there's the ecosystem has just been going like absolutely crazy. There's so many more fish. You can go out there and actually see things swimming around in the summer, and it's just a really nice place. And you see here another picture of me. This is me, like this clothes I'm wearing. Just me and my dad took me to church, and after church, I was like, "Oh, Dad, before we go home, can I just go back to the river?" Because I just really enjoyed being there, you know. And so things that I wanted to see more of were like day camps during the summer, like so they wouldn't have to spend like sleep away, but like they would definitely be able to like have like a day just hanging out the river, learning how to fish, learning about like how to pick like there'd be a day they pick up trash, maybe there'd be a day that they could actually, like the thing that I did, like go out on the river and like with that net, they could actually try that themselves with an adult. Obviously, another thing I wanted to see is like public events. Like the Shad Fest was actually it was really fun. There was so many people came out, and it was just a really nice experience. And I think a lot of people had fun. We had music. There's teaching kids how to fish, and it was a really fun experience for me. And I like to see, because when I was doing my thing during the summer, I was the only kid my age there. Like the youngest person there was this guy in college, and he was like, and he still had to be like at least a senior. So I want to see like more like people my age doing this, because it's actually really like it's fun. You know, it's like something that I'm interested in, I'm passionate about. I think there's definitely a lot of people who feel the same as I do. And I feel like, because the only way you can really get into this is if you know people in like the thing. And I only reason I got into the participating in this is because my dad knows Mr. Simeon. But like I feel like if we like pushed like more like I don't want to say like commercial, I mean like I don't know, like more like things to show people, like I guess like websites, pamphlets, or just like I said, easier access to information in general. It just makes it like easy so people can get involved if they want to get involved. Because some people like, oh, I would love to do this, but I don't know how. And so you just make that information available for really just anyone, for the public to have. And yeah, so that's really it. And thank you.
So Frank, where do you live in
Yeah.
Wilmington?
Oh, I live in Trolley Square, like right over there.
Jen Atkins and I did a couple of youth activities, and it was amazing to me that no matter where kids lived in Wilmington, they all referenced the Brandywine and Brandywine Park.
Yeah, it's really close to, like literally from where I'm sitting. If I look forward, that's just like that long trail to go down there. I can just literally leave my house now, walk down there, and be down there in like 2 minutes. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's really close.
That's great. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And we would love to have we're working on this plan for the rivers. I loved your recommendations for things that we could do that you'd like to see. And as you think about that, we'd love to have your input on, it would be great to have more young people like you interested and involved in the river. And I think a lot of us who are really interested think that that would be really cool. But a lot of us may not also wonder, like, what's the best way to do that? Like what would make this interesting to someone your age? And how can we get people more involved? So whatever ideas you have for us, we would love to have them.
Yeah, I think that'd be kind of cool too.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna be making everything from this workshop available for follow-up. So we'll have to be sure to follow up with you, Frank, and continue to get some ideas from you, because I think you've got a great perspective for us.
Frank, check out Martha, my colleague, put something about us. There's a summer program called Green Jobs, which you may have heard of, or you might be interested in. So she's got her info there if you're interested in doing something over the summer with it.
Yeah,
I
thank
know
you.
they work with DNS as well.
Yeah, you get paid to hang out in nature, Frank.
Hang out and work.
There's a little bit of work, but you'll
A
have
little bit of
fun.
work.
Well, Frank, we'll definitely
Right.
follow up for the monitoring. Again, that's coming up soon, but we have some interesting ideas that you can help us with to get more outreach education into the school, to get more kids, more opportunities. And Jen, maybe for this group, I don't know if it's been considered, but maybe some type of youth council or youth advisory group. And
That
maybe
would be
Frank can
neat.
invite his friends and others, or we can network and he can
Yeah,
help us with that.
I told my
Yeah.
friends about it. Like a lot of my friends are interested in stuff. I was like, oh yeah, over the summer I do this thing. You could do it it'd be cool if you could join too. But yeah, I tell like some people about it all the time.
Yeah, cool. Well, Frank, I don't know what the rest of your schedule is like, but our group we have one more time that we're going to break out into smaller groups. So if you're interested in joining a breakout discussion, you certainly are welcome to do that. And I think for everybody on, this will be your last group. So pick a group that you ideally haven't been to yet. And I think Maggie's going to be setting those up. And after this time, we're all going to come back and we'll hear report outs from each of the groups. The folks who are facilitating those discussions will give us report outs, and we'll be sure to wrap things up. So one more chance at some small group discussions. And
I think I figured out the problems that you all can take it on your own. If it doesn't show up this time, then I don't know, I'm going to flip my desk. So I'm going to go ahead and open them. We'll have one final 20 minutes and then come back together. So let's give it a shot and see.
Thank you, Maggie. Good job.
You're welcome.
all right, looks like people are back. We made it back out of the breakout realm. So yeah, that was our last breakout session. What we would like to do next is to hear from the facilitators of each of the groups. So as participants were moving around amongst the different groups, the facilitators stayed, so they get the benefit of all of the discussions that were for that group. So I think it will be easiest if I just call on the facilitators for each room and ask them to just give a brief report out on, the discussions that happen and any, really key ideas from that breakout session. And this is not a surprise to any of the facilitators, so hopefully they are ready. And so why don't we start with Nicole for the restoration session, which I know is really looked pretty well attended. So.
Okay, I think I'm off mute here. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm just compiling my list here. Okay, great. So yeah, we of course had the 3 sessions. We had let's see, like 5 people, I think, in our first one. Our second one was actually pretty lonely, and Christy and I just hung out together. And then we had 1 person in our final discussion. The first group, we really worked around the first question of, is something missing, as well as the first strategy and a little bit into the second strategy. And that's actually all the farther we got there. So, and then in the second group, we started off at the second strategy and worked our way the rest of the way down. So as far as our first question went for something missing, something that really came up as very interesting is that within the restoration strategies, there was a lot of emphasis on wetlands, but maybe not quite as much emphasis on the upland area and the riparian habitat, being specifically mentioned. And so that was something that a few people thought really should be part of that. Another thing that was really interesting that came out of these conversations was that there should really be more emphasis on the restoration of the urban infrastructure as well. So living shorelines and green infrastructure within urban systems too, because those are also you can definitely restore those types of systems alongside those wetlands. So that was the big thing that came out from those questions. And then some other really great points. So we had a really big focus in this group on, looking at that Peterson study as a guide for a bunch of different things. It's, kind of what they've used for their metrics and what they've done in the past, and using different similar projects as a general guide for the process through the restoration. We definitely also discussed how no one's a big fan of impoundments, and really wanted to look at soft edges and making sure that edging is done correctly. And yeah, that was a lot of the really great information. We also had a lot of information about the fish passage and the interest in, how mussels are tied to fish restoration, because, those life cycles are interconnected. And, people thought that, using funding to tackle fish passage through those different dams on the Brandywine, especially, could be something that could be really, really helpful to just increase our restorative power. We also brought out that something within the landowners, helping kind of increase the awareness, increase outreach to show them that, they can do things that aren't going to be $1 million projects, but projects that they can simply restore part of their property, and that's going to be helping with their flooding issues, with just a general water quality, anything and everything having to do with restoration. So that was another really great point that came out of our conversations. And I think that's, I'll stop there, but it was a really great discussion. And we have a lot of great notes to send everybody. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Nicole. And so how about next, we'll hear from protection. Travis, do you want to give us a recap?
Sure thing. Yeah, so it was, we could have used a little more friendly faces in there, but we had some great discussion with the folks that we did have in the room. Not a lot to add in terms of what was missing. I don't think we really identified any new strategies, but talked a lot about the existing ones. We had some good discussion about our initial strategy. Our first strategy listed under protection was to work with the newly formed Newcastle County Open Space Protection Program. So we had someone in one of our sessions that is a part of that group, and we talked about that it's a new group, but that it seems like a lot of the goals and the strategies that they're going to be utilizing in order to identify and evaluate potential property acquisitions are very similar to what we're doing here in terms of mapping the different habitat value and kind of looking at the overlap between all of the goals in our program to assign some type of scoring criteria or value to the area. The big thing there is aside from the property acquisition cost is the long-term maintenance aspect of those property acquisitions. So properly planning for that, both in terms of strategy and resources, but also cost. That was if we look at the sub question there about what would you do if you had the funding, it would be purchase more property, but really the limiting factor there is on the long-term maintenance and perpetuity for how those areas are managed. Didn't get a lot of discussion on seed banking, but that, I guess, to be expected. That's a kind of a narrow one, but folks agreed with the goal and the aim for that strategy. We talked a bit about enforcement for mitigation of wetland losses, and I think there was one preference indicated for kind of funneling the mitigation towards private lands and away from public lands, which is a certainly an understandable perspective. And then we talked a bit about one of our other strategies involved the management of smaller, maybe isolated wetland or habitat areas, and maybe folding those under one larger management plan or umbrella. And CWMAs or CWMUs was discussed, which are kind of tools that are used a lot in Western states to manage larger areas with smaller clusters of habitat. They seem to be used quite a bit in Maryland as well for managing areas where maybe the state doesn't own the land, but has an agreement on how to maintain it with the public or the private ownership. So that's interesting, and certainly a tool that we can look at to add to our protection arsenal.
Cool. Nice. All right. How about remediation? Sari, I think that's you.
Yes, it is. So thanks for everybody who joined my room. We had 4 folks the first session, and it's all by my lonesome in the second, and then I had one participant in the third. So thanks everybody. And it was really interesting. There were 3 things I actually heard across both groups. So it was really great to hear certain ideas sort of repeated, and they're on people's minds. And I think they're perhaps things that are being repeated across all groups. First of all, I heard, there's a lot of great plans, a lot of other great work that's already been done out there. We should do some, searches about what other types of plans have already been put in place. Don't reinvent the wheel. And even within Delaware, there are other great plans that we should be pulling on and thinking through and pulling elements from that have been implemented well. I heard, it would be really great to be partnering consistently with universities and university programs, so they can provide lots of different types of support, financial support for new innovative development. They can provide student support with engineering students who actually want to do the work, undertake the work. And then there's also programmatic support from associations like Delaware Sea Grant, where they could actually undertake things like comparative policy studies that would be really useful, especially to hear what's been working for other places. And finally, everyone kept touching on the idea of looking at differences between publicly owned and privately owned properties, and thinking through the types of policies that could be implemented to support a vision about how things can be done to ensure that we're working toward remediation goals for both, and thinking through how they would be differently applied to public versus private. And we talked about a number of different other things, but those are the ones that I heard repeated that I thought were pretty interesting, and I thought maybe it would be interesting for all of you to hear across the different groups.
Nice. Thank you, Sari.
Sure.
Okay, how about next up, resilience? Jen Holmes, so on.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to those who joined me in resilience. Great to have you all and the expertise that was brought to the table. I just wanted to bring up a few things. We did note that the resilience topic kind of crossed over with many of the other topic areas, of course. And so we had a lot of things that might have been brought up in other topic areas as well, including specifically restoration policy and education. And speaking of that, they did, the folks in our sessions spoke about the importance of public engagement and outreach and education, and especially making sure that we're engaging it, a diverse and making that outreach diverse and inclusive. And as well as one of the big issues that came up a lot, of course, was impervious surface coverage, and that was one of the strategies. And out of that strategy, one of the key elements that kept coming up was to look at how we think about transportation, and maybe the fact that we need to rethink transportation and mass transit, and how people are getting from point A to point B, in addition to, of course, the bikeable, walkable, but it's a little bit even more than that, looking at it holistically and seeing if we actually need to rethink transportation. And then, of course, the large impervious areas in and around the rivers, looking at, is there other ways to maybe break up that impervious surface, looking at different strategies and specific project areas that are being looked at to reduce the parking need. Again, going back to rethinking our transportation, if we didn't need as many cars, perhaps that parking area would also reduce in size. So a little bit of innovation there. That was talked about quite a bit. There were other things, great ideas that came up, but I know that short on time, so I will defer to the next person. Thank you.
Great, thanks. How about community access next? Todd, do you want to give us a recap?
Yes, thanks, Jen. So we had several small yet cozy groups that talked through 3 different sessions there. First off, the concept of what was missing from a few things, and I think the overarching theme was the concept of connecting communities, connecting different ways of access. So not just thinking about one particular plan, but making sure to interact with, say, Newcastle County or the city or other municipalities as to what they're doing, and if CBR4 can be part of a catalyst to do that, that would be important. One of the safety issues that was brought up is the concept of just having some change management as it relates to some of these redevelopments, in the sense that there may be a perception that it's not a safe place to be. We can do that through some of the strategies, which were just to have a non-enforcement presence, if you will, in many of these parks or recreational areas, just someone to be helpful, to show people what it's all about and give them that perception that, yes, this is yours and this is yours to access. Please be here. Another part about that was also making sure everything we do is ADA compliant to ensure access for all. So that would be a challenge for some of our natural stuff, but it's doable, and we can work on that. Another part of this is while our strategy was focusing a lot on what we're doing with the waterway, it's the concept also of making sure if we have a water trail plan, we have a river trail plan. Comes back to the original point of multiple points of access for communities, and maybe not just the communities directly within the CBR4 project area, but those that may be a little bit further away. So that was another thing we looked at. A lot of this too focused on, community access from the perspective of making our project area more of a destination, providing some sort of amenity, some sort of interesting feature that gives that level of comfort to come back in for the community. So we've got some tasks ahead of us as it relates to learning what else is going on, reaching out to places that are going on, connecting all those ideas together, and then changing that perception of, yes, this is a nice place to be as these changes are occurring. It's not what it used to be 20 years ago as we make these changes. So we had a lot of great, very specific details that Marion's captured in our notes. So when we go through that, we'll have a lot more to work on. So thank you.
Cool, thanks. Okay, moving on to education and engagement. John, what do you got for us?
Quite a lot on paper. I took 4 pages of notes. Poor Sarah must have reams of paper of notes. Now we had some really great discussions. We had several people in each of our 3, and what I learned very quickly is that education and engagement are very broad topics, and there's a lot that goes into them. So I have a small summary of some of the things that I personally took away, and again, I think all of the notes will capture a lot of the smaller details. But a couple of the important things that I think are worth sharing. Maybe one of the biggest ones is that small projects go a very long way. Just doing something as opposed to talking about it is going to give us some more credibility and show the communities and interested parties that we mean what we say. And maybe a better way to say it is put your money where your mouth is, right? And the scale doesn't necessarily matter. I took that away. If we can do and plan some small things and get some folks from the community involved in it, then we may get more traction out of it than if we do an all-day workshop about the things that we're doing, right? So that was one big thing that I personally took away, where the, I guess, engagement piece of this, kind of one of the, reading between the lines maybe, is really that we need to know who our audience is and cater to them, and use different approaches for our different categories, I guess, of people. And the discussion at one point came around to, the right now adults, and I'll say, and politicians have the money, the power, and the influence, and we need to appeal to their self-interests differently than we appeal to the future, which is the children, the grade school, or our youth will just say, and a couple neat ideas. Obviously that whole youth advisory council was a fantastic idea that came out of our main group session, that fits into that. And another person had a thought of having the kids do a workshop just like we've done, have them plan it, have them execute it, and do it with our help. Because I know every one of you were riveted to Frank's story, right? And we listen, and maybe when I'm talking, you're not listening, who knows? But the idea is that we change who's doing the talking and change the perspective, and we might reach a few more people that way. A couple good ideas or things that I noted were about really the amount of information that we have available and the opportunities that we all identify as being available, but there really not being a good catalog or clearinghouse of what those things are. That could be educational opportunities for kids. It could be different community meetings. It could be grant opportunities, but more or less kind of a one-stop shop, if you will, for the things that pertain to our project and our project area that we're trying to promote and focus on. And if someone could go to just our webpage and find 50 different opportunities that they could then click through to, that idea came out, and I don't know who manages that, but when you have to go look in 10 different places for each of these different things, or if you don't know what grants are available and what they mean, being able to go to one place and say, okay, there's 15 different grant opportunities with a short description and a link to take me to where that is, or where I can find out more, might be beneficial to us in the long run. We talked about teaching the teachers. Might be one thing that we could do, sort of a roadshow, if you will, to educate some of the teachers, and maybe have them be able to bring that back to their classrooms. I thought that was kind of a neat idea. And then again, possibly building small or short curriculum related specifically to CBR4 that teachers could utilize when they do have the time, for a 1 day or even a partial day science lesson. But instead of it being to a general river, whatever name it is, maybe that curriculum and the photos that the kids see are actual from the Brandywine and the Christina, and kind of brings that right back to home for them. I thought that was kind of powerful, yet simple at the same time. We had some real good considerations that we discussed related to the River Star program. Not worth going into probably any particulars right at the moment. They'll be captured in the notes. But certainly a supported idea. I think we just have to be careful how we do it and how we structure it to make it the best we can for our intended purposes, is what I took away from it. And the last thing, it was right here at the end of our session, this last session, but I put a big star next to it. It was expand our audience beyond the obvious and try to reach the people that aren't being reached typically, and hit some different impasses that we haven't thought of yet, and that might help us gain a little more traction. That's that. That's all.
Thanks, John. Thank you. That's a lot. Yeah, that was a pretty well attended one too. So last but certainly not least is public policy. And John Herod, do you want to give us a recap on that?
I think Matt was going to take the first, and I will fill in the blanks.
Okay.
Yeah, we got the notes up in front of me. So I think that go through a couple of specifics that came out, and then some generalities. The first strategy was around building restoration into infrastructure projects. And there was a lot of good discussion around the relationship of that with CSOs and MS4 plans in the city, and incorporating those plans and goals into the work that CBR4 is doing, and trying to figure out ways to leverage that, including things like maybe elevating the rank or importance of CSOs based on their importance for other factors that we've identified during the CBR4 process. And then we had a couple of I guess the second strategy was developing a state level cumulative impact assessment protocol between agencies. There was a suggestion there that if that is done, that environmental justice communities should be specifically defined, and that those cumulative impacts specifically addressing EJ communities should be prioritized. Then we had two strategies that were both involving incentivizing or requiring green space during development through zoning and other ordinances, both green space generally, but also specifically waterfront zoning and the provision of easements for access and shoreline protection. Those were kind of paired in folks' discussions, and that's seemed to be generally things that folks agreed with, although there was some suggestion that that policies and strategies might be the primary tool, with zoning being sort of the secondary piece in certain cases. And then broadly, I guess related to that, there was a lot of interest in increasing recreational access to the river, to the resources for businesses and for the community. We didn't really get to the fifth and sixth strategies too much during the discussion, but there was a lot of general interest in ensuring that there's buy-in from both city and county leadership to this plan and related efforts, and making sure that the city of Wilmington's sustainability plan incorporates this, that the mayor and the county executive have buy-in with regard to the goals, and other political leadership, with the suggestion that if we don't have political and community leaders on board, essentially we can have all the policy recommendations we want, but they're not going to go anywhere. So that was something that was discussed a lot, was just making sure that we find ways to engage leaders early in the process around the goals that we're working on. John, I don't know if you want to add to that.
The only thing I would add was there was a discussion of policy as it relates to businesses and organizations on the river, and including access as a source for recreation, whether it's access included with a new development. It's a piece that's considered as a policy.
Great. Great. Well, it sounds like all of these groups have really covered a lot of ground. I'm really eager to see the notes and think about, and I know our team's going to definitely take those back and think about how we might be able to add on to what we've been working on with these. So, and I want to give a big shout out to all the facilitators and the note takers on this, and yeah, and everyone who navigated the breakout session process successfully, including Maggie. Thank you, Maggie, for being our lead on all of that. I think with that kind of concludes our part 2 breakout extravaganza on strategies. And I don't have a lot to say about next steps, other than just to remind everyone that, we are about halfway in on this. So it's not the end of it yet. We very much intend to utilize the information that we gathered here today, and the team will be taking a look at that for sure. But the next step in this process is to start scoping out specific projects. So we'll continue to refine the strategy and refine those strategies, as well as even the goals and the objectives as we go along. But we're going to dig in really hard next on the projects. And someone early asked about accessing infrastructure funding. There are a lot of grant opportunities coming up. So where we can, we'll be jumping ahead on that to make sure that if there is low-hanging fruit, that we can start accessing some of those things. But mostly we want to get a really good, solid set of projects that we feel like really reflect and are great examples of the kinds of strategies that we've talked about here today, so that we can actually start putting some things on the ground and working with people to do that. So that's a big part of the next step. we did record today's session. Not all the breakout sessions, obviously, that would be probably a bear for anyone to watch, but certainly the first part with all the presentations will be recorded. So if you know of people who missed this or you wanted to go back to any of it, when the recording is up and running and everything, we'll be sending an email out, I think, to all the participants with a link to that. And we are thinking very carefully about, like, how can we keep the conversation going? How can we do some of the other things that we took the poll earlier in the program about, to make sure that we're keeping people in the loop and better engaging some of the people we haven't engaged yet. And so we will be hopefully coming up with all kinds of ways that we could potentially do that. So the message is, stay tuned. You will be hearing from us again shortly with the link and following up on this, but then also in the midterm with potentially some other opportunities. And we want to keep the conversation going. So I think that's it for today. Maggie, Sari, anyone from the CBR4 team, anything else that before we close out? Just huge thanks also to the folks who made it through the entire program. We know it was a lot, a long period of time, but we really appreciate that deep dive into some of these topics. And I think it's really going to help us understand what we need to do moving forward. So enjoy what's the rest of your day, and also the rest of your week. And we will be in touch for sure. Thank you all.